Hello, my name is Abigail. Currently, I am 35 years old. However, the incident I am about to narrate occurred 2 years ago when I was still married to my despicable husband and enduring the constant mistreatment from my dreadful mother-in-law. This is the tale of how I finally found the courage to stand up for myself and seek revenge. I remember that day so vividly. I was already filled with anxiety, knowing that my mother-in-law was coming over for her usual coffee visit. My husband's words only added to my unease. He said, "Darling, I don't think our relationship is working. I feel like you never listen to me, even when I give you simple instructions. This isn't going to work. I'm sorry." Silence followed. I braced myself for those 2 words that would shatter me completely. "It's over." Those words echoed in my mind, repeating endlessly. I almost begged him to say it outright, to rip off the Band-Aid, as I anticipated the pain those words would bring. "I don't think this tablecloth will work when my mother visits," he continued. "I asked you to get the blue floral set, not the yellow one. Why don't you ever listen to me? You know that feeling when you love someone, but also want to strangle them." Well, that was me at that moment, except my love was slowly fading away with each exhausting hour spent with my low-life husband, my spouse. My partner had a peculiar way of playing with me. Some might even describe it as sadistic, but I simply consider it to be cruel. He would keep me on edge, always on the verge of an anxiety attack, with his hollow attempts to leave me. He did this knowing that, unfortunately, I would be nothing without him. In my early 20s, I made the foolish choice to abandon my aspirations of owning a cafe. I had everything planned out, a cozy atmosphere with a warm chestnut theme, where the air would always be filled with the aroma of freshly baked brownies and brewed coffee. It was my dream to earn enough money to bring this fantasy to life. And my spouse, who was then my boyfriend, seemed supportive of this idea, or so I thought. You see, whenever I would share my passion with him, he would initially match my excitement, but then swiftly interject with some suggestions, so to speak. "Yeah, that sounds great. Or we could choose a simpler lifestyle, you know. I've always envisioned living in the suburbs and coming home to home-cooked meals every day. We would reside in a spacious house with 3 children and 2 dogs, 1 large and 1 small. You wouldn't have to lift a finger. All you'd have to do is take care of the house, the kids, and of course, me." Oh, why I ever found such a statement endearing or charming is beyond me. Reflecting on it now, I realize that I was deceived, my friends, misled and tricked into believing that this man possessed any genuine intentions. When he uttered those words, his intentions were clear. I must confess, my underdeveloped prefrontal cortex found this behavior endearing. The idea of living a comfortable life in a spacious residence with 3 children and 2 dogs, 1 large and 1 small, instantly captivated me. I was passionate about the bakery concept, but little did I realize that James was gradually eroding my independence, transforming me into his obedient servant who would cater to his every whim. Now, at 33 years old, I recognize that I married an immature man who still relies on his mother for even the most basic necessities. Speaking of his mother, this is the tale of how I managed to achieve 2 goals with 1 action, seeking revenge against the 2 individuals who made my existence a living nightmare for nearly a decade. Believe me when I say that James and my mother-in-law are cut from the same cloth. I apologize, James. I completely forgot that you preferred the blue floral set. I've been preoccupied with preparing the house for her visit, and it simply slipped my mind. I sincerely apologize. Oh well, it's all right. I don't expect you to be knowledgeable about such matters anyway. After all, you didn't even complete college, for heaven's sake. I must admit those words hurt. I was unable to finish college due to financial constraints, and honestly, with my mind consumed by dreams of owning a cafe, pursuing higher education was the least of my concerns. Furthermore, James had convinced me that completing college would be a futile waste of time, as I would be fully occupied with our future business. The household was extremely busy with various domestic responsibilities. He mentioned that I shouldn't be concerned about it and instead focus on being a competent homemaker and improving my skills. Once again, I fell for his persuasive words. He always had a knack for convincing me to comply with his plans. You are correct, James. I deeply apologize for everything. How can I make it up to you? Well, at this point, there's nothing to be done except ensuring that everything is prepared and doing so promptly. My mother will be returning home soon, and I don't want you to embarrass me like last time. I'm sorry, James. I promise I won't engage in any inappropriate behavior. So it's best to be seen but not heard, right? I remember. I will behave properly, I assure you. As evident from my replies, my self-confidence was completely shattered. I had no sense of self-worth whatsoever, and I always believed the hurtful insults that James and his mother would hurl at me. It's understandable that being demeaned and degraded for approximately a decade takes a toll on one's mental well-being. You start accepting such mistreatment as normal. On that fateful day, I finished setting up the table and anxiously waited to welcome my mother-in-law at the entrance. I was afraid of James, but let me tell you, I was terrified of my mother-in-law. She was just like James, but more subtle and manipulative. She would deceive you into thinking she was on your side, only to betray you without a second thought. Nevertheless, I stood there, stiff, and forced a fake smile on my face, embodying the epitome of the stereotypical traditional 1950s housewife. Homemaker. My spouse desired a flawless, automaton-like Barbie doll to cater to him. And in that instant, I realized that he obtained precisely what he desired. This realization that dawned upon me was poorly timed, as at that very moment, I was abruptly brought back to reality by the piercing voice of my mother-in-law, accompanied by her lengthy and polished nails snapping at me, imploring for my attention and jolting me out of my reverie. I swear to the Almighty, she is hard of hearing, this one. Where did you discover her, my dear son? Honestly, mother, I do not know, but it seems I am stuck with her. Ha ha ha, how unfortunate. I swiftly resumed my role as the compliant and submissive servant. I mean, years of indoctrination will have that effect on you. And I proceeded to welcome my mother-in-law into the immaculate conditions of my abode. Oh, what is that strong odor? It smells dreadful, Abigail. Please enlighten me as to what it is. It is simply the apple pie that I have been baking for today's tea time. I experimented with a new recipe. Goodness, why? Before I could respond, James interjected abruptly. I believe she still harbors the notion that she could be a baker. Both James and my mother-in-law erupted into laughter uncontrollably. I was just relieved that my children were not present to witness me endure this. I purposely left them at my sister's residence whenever the malevolent witch would grace us with her presence. She would often inquire about seeing her grandchildren, but I would always come up with an excuse that they were attending dance or football practice. It was during these intense moments that I was particularly grateful for the affection that I cared deeply for my offspring. Even though I didn't have the same affection for myself, I cherished my little ones, and I would never want to expose them to the cruel and harsh realities of their father and their grandmother. The reason why I was so grateful for this is that I could sense the stinging in my eyes and the hoarseness in my throat. I'm certain that my demeanor began to falter as I heard my mother-in-law exclaim, "Throat." I'm certain that my demeanor began to falter as I heard my mother-in-law say, "Ew, are you serious about shedding tears, Abigail? It's just some lighthearted banter. Honestly, mature, you have 3 children, for goodness sake. Imagine if they saw you right now. Pull yourself together, woman. Speaking of those cherubs, where are they? Oh well, you know, Miss Adams was unwell yesterday, so she rescheduled dance practice to today, and the kids couldn't miss it because the dance recital is coming up so soon." With a dissatisfied sigh, she accepted the excuse and proceeded into our extravagant dining room where the event would take place. Phew, another crisis averted, and thank goodness, I didn't burst into tears at that moment. I quickly hurried to the kitchen to check on my seemingly repulsive pie, but when I took it out of the oven, I was engulfed by the most delightful aroma. I reveled in that sweet and savory scent, and for an instant I was transported to what seemed to be another realm. I envisioned what my life could have been like, frolicking in my surroundings. There was a cozy, intimate cafe serving orders for devoted patrons and newcomers alike. Something amusing would unfold among the customers, and we would all chuckle together at their antics. The cafe resonated with laughter and the sound of people typing away on their laptops, finding inspiration in this charming setting for their various writing endeavors. Perhaps it was a fresh script for the local theater, a mysterious romance novel, or an uplifting article to share with the world. Unfortunately, my daydreaming was abruptly interrupted by the heavy footsteps of my husband, entering the kitchen with a discontented expression on his face. I simply wanted to ensure that everything was prepared. You're taking longer than anticipated. Remember what I mentioned about embarrassing me, Abigail? Irritated by his constant need for attention, I reassured him that everything was nearly ready and he needn't worry. Maybe it was the euphoria I felt from my interrupted daydream. During particularly stressful days, I often retreated into my thoughts as a means of preserving my sanity. However, on this occasion, I felt unusually courageous. Despite being mocked moments ago for my baking, I yearned to share something. I wrestled with the idea internally, resisting the urge to blurt out my desire. Then, in a rare moment of clarity and joy, I triumphed over the doubts that sought to silence me. Just as James made his way out of the kitchen to join his mother, I impulsively exclaimed that I wanted to experiment with my new coffee recipe. The loud footsteps abruptly halted, and my heart sank as I realized the mistake I had made. Mentally berating myself, I prepared for the harsh words that were about to escape my husband's lips. To my surprise, he approached me directly, glaring at me and angrily whispering that if I dared to mention that terrible thing again, I would regret it. He declared that he would be the one making the coffee. I nodded vigorously, immediately agreeing. I switched into a robotic and submissive mode, resembling a docile house servant. I watched as he stormed out of the kitchen, and then proceeded to set the table with food and drinks. As we sat down and began saying grace, my mother-in-law and James engaged in a lengthy conversation while I ate silently. Strangely enough, my mother-in-law unexpectedly urged me to join in the conversation. This was unusual, as she typically preferred me to remain quiet and unseen. Was I hearing correctly? I had to pinch myself, as this felt unreal. What? Are you serious? The bewildered expression on James' face confirmed that I had indeed heard correctly. My mother-in-law was genuinely interested. Yes, Abigail, I don't jest all the time. I believe you could have established a reputation for yourself. Tears welled up in my eyes. This was the encouragement I needed. For a long time, my aspiration was extinguished, but now there seemed to be a glimmer of hope. Honestly, it's not even too late. You could initiate your own business. We will assist you. I promise to God, I must have been hallucinating because this simply couldn't be real. Is it possible that the individuals who have made my life miserable for the past 10 years have finally changed? Suddenly, the budding confidence and bravery began to resurface, and this time, it became evident that I didn't need to hold back. I decided to say, in fact, I had planned on serving you all a new coffee blend and recipe today. My gaze immediately shifted to James, whose stare burned into my soul. But at that moment, I completely disregarded it. My mother-in-law's eyes widened with surprise. Really, James? Why didn't you inform me that she wanted to prepare us a nice cup of coffee because she wasn't supposed to? Nonsense, you must bring it at once. Mom, are you being serious? Of course, I'm being serious. Why would I jest about this? Well, because we always tease her. There was a pause, and my mother-in-law stared intently at James, her face turning red, and after a few moments of profound silence, she burst out laughing wholeheartedly. "Oh my goodness, I almost fooled you, didn't I?" "Mom, what?" "Oh, now I understand. You really tricked me." These two started laughing like young schoolchildren. I found myself astonished, sitting at the table with some girls. I couldn't believe what had just happened to me. My head was throbbing and my heart was aching. How could she play such a cruel and unnecessary prank? I couldn't bear it any longer. I hurriedly made my way to the kitchen, struggling to keep myself composed. In the distance, I could hear James remark, "Oh, look at the mess you've caused. She's in tears." Though his words seemed concerned, his tone was malevolent and sadistic, causing me to choke up as I reached the kitchen door. I closed it behind me, gasping for breath and sobbing, trying in vain to calm myself down. The damage had been done. I began pacing back and forth in the kitchen. This had gone too far. I had no interest in crying anymore. I was consumed with pure rage and fury. My anger burned so intensely that my tears flowed down my face, attempting to quell the boiling heat rising within me. I needed to take action, even if it was something small. I had to seek revenge. At that moment, as if it were destiny, the coffee maker finished brewing, and I turned my head towards it. That was it. That was how I would exact my revenge. I should also mention that my mother-in-law and James had a special set of china for occasions like these, while I was left using a plain mug. I noticed them arranged on the kitchen counter, two exquisite cups, one tinted with a soft pink, and the other with a delicate shade of green. One tinted with baby pink and the other cup, colored in pistachio green, sat adjacent to a lackluster gray mug. The coffee maker hummed as it brewed, nearing its completion. Feeling dejected, I made my way towards the cups to begin pouring the coffee when something caught my eye in my designated mug. The other two cups were empty, but mine held something peculiar at the bottom. Intrigued, I took a closer look and, to my surprise, I discovered what seemed to be chili flakes resting in the depths of my mug. It was truly bizarre. Why would there be chili flakes in my mug? I examined the cup further, and in that moment, I realized that James, and perhaps even my mother-in-law, were attempting to play a cruel prank on me. Once again, frustration welled up inside me as I wondered when this torment would cease. However, simultaneously, I felt a sense of relief for catching this before it went any further. But now I was unsure of what to do next. I could simply discard the chili flakes, enjoy my coffee, and relish in the confusion and disappointment that would surely be evident on James' face. However, I felt the need to take further action, and then an idea struck me. Hastily, I emptied the contents of my mug into a cup with a pink tint and proceeded to fill the individual cups with the freshly brewed coffee. Just as I finished, I heard heavy footsteps approaching the door, almost in a frantic manner. It seemed that he had remembered leaving his foolish prank exposed, and upon realizing that I was inside, he must have assumed that I had discovered it. But he was too slow. Just as he opened the door, I had completed pouring the coffee into the remaining cups. As I held the cup in my hand, I turned around to encounter a rather irate James. However, my radiant and cheerful smile contrasted sharply with his expression. The coffee had finished brewing, so I decided to pour it into the individual mugs. "Oh, I understand now," he muttered. There was a momentary silence, during which it seemed like a hint of sadness flickered across James' face. Unfortunately, it was so fleeting that I wondered if I had imagined it, as he quickly reverted back to his usual cantankerous self and resumed his tirade. "You better not have tampered with the coffee. I already told you that no one wants to try your repulsive concoctions. That's why my mother played that brilliant prank on you," he sneered once again. He walked up to me to take the tray from my hands, snickering all the while, and then turned and headed towards the dining room. However, he paused at the doorway and sounded slightly panicked as he asked, "Abigail, did you notice anything particularly different about the cups when you arranged them?" I pondered for a moment before responding, no, not at all. Why do you ask? His reply was swift, oh, never mind. I trailed behind him, eager not to miss the impending spectacle. My anger and sadness began to fade away, replaced by a sense of schadenfreude as I anticipated the unfolding events. I took a seat at the table, and my mother-in-law couldn't help but notice the significant shift from being on the verge of tears. Moments prior to feeling somewhat cheerful, I simply couldn't contain my enthusiasm. My mother-in-law started to suspect me, and with a raised eyebrow, she said, Abigail, dear, are you okay? Oh, I've never been better. Oh, all right. At this moment, both James and his mother were suspicious of my behavior, so I had to calm down. James and my mother-in-law began to add sugar and syrup to their respective cups, and I was patiently waiting for my turn to add sugar to my cup, while also observing everyone's reaction to what was about to happen. I watched as my mother-in-law brought her pink-tinted cup to her lips and let the commotion unfold. She took one big sip, big mistake, and her face twisted and contorted in disgust. James, what's wrong with this coffee? What do you mean, Mom? It tastes terrible. And what is, oh my goodness? Oh my goodness, my mother-in-law's face became redder and redder. It appeared as if she was swelling up honestly. Her tongue was sticking out panting like a dog, and she was swelling up honestly. Her tongue was sticking out, panting like a dog, and she was tearing up. Why on earth is my coffee hot? Is coffee, Mom, supposed to be hot? No, my tongue is burning. My mother-in-law stood up from the table, pacing around frantically and crying about how painful it was. Some of you might call me sadistic, but honestly, I took pleasure in that agony, and don't worry, it wasn't too severe. Everyone needs a little spice in their lives, in their existence. At this moment, James rises to attempt to soothe his mother, but she was determined to consume the milk in a rapid and excessive manner. With both of them perplexed by the recent events, I decided to take action. Oh, James, how forgetful I am. I completely neglected to mention that I noticed something peculiar about the mugs. I observed that my mug contained some flavor enhancers, and while I appreciate your kind gesture of adding them to my cup without my permission or consent, I simply did not desire them. However, I thought that perhaps your mother would derive more enjoyment from them than I would, so I proceeded to transfer the contents into her cup instead. I hope you relish the coffee, as it is my special blend. Both individuals stared at me with intense animosity and repulsion. You worthless, hopeless, deceitful little ingrate. Despite my mother-in-law berating me and James appearing as though he wanted to violently confront me, I remained completely composed. It seemed that at that moment, my body and spirit had been completely depleted of any capacity for empathy and love towards individuals who had made it their daily mission for the past decade to inconvenience me and make my life wretched. It was time for me to seek retribution, and truthfully, it felt immensely satisfying. Naturally, both James and my mother-in-law hurled insults at me, but as I mentioned before, I remained remarkably tranquil throughout it all. I calmly rose from my seat, ascended to my bedroom, packed an overnight bag for myself and my children, and proceeded to make my way towards the exit. As I attempted descending the stairs to confront the disarray, I was struck by the true wretchedness of it all. My mother-in-law made an attempt to alleviate her burnt tongue, while James wore a visibly apprehensive expression. This was a familiar sight for me, and the irony was not lost on me, believe me. Approaching the scene, I took a deep breath. The two of you have dedicated yourselves to ruining my life. Over the past decade, I have endured your petty remarks and manipulative behavior, fueled by your narcissism. But I have reached my limit. I hold more value in my pinky toe than the both of you combined. I am officially done with you, James, and I will be staying with my sister until I can sort everything out. And naturally, I will be taking the children with me. Enjoy the day and the life you believe you deserve. Farewell. And with that, I confidently marched out of the house, leaving the chaos behind me. I tuned out their hurtful words as I gathered my belongings and departed. I must admit, during the drive to pick up my children, I succumbed to tears. My emotions were a mixture of bitterness and sweetness, overwhelming in their complexity. I felt relief, finally free from the toxic environment I could no longer endure. However, I'd also experienced sadness as the reality of the situation sank in. What if legal action is taken? Is she all right? Perhaps I went too far, but I pushed those thoughts aside. She was a mature woman, and honestly, she simply required some milk to cope with the discomfort. Well, you might be curious about what happened next. Let me inform you. The way my life has been transformed for the superior is quite extraordinary and, dare I say, implausible. However, each day I am appreciative for the situation I find myself in. After that incident, I stayed at my sister's residence with the children for a few nights, all the while avoiding calls from James and my mother-in-law. I was not prepared to communicate with them. Eventually, though, I had to confront the situation, and I returned to the house that held so much suffering for such an extended period. And James and I sat down to have a conversation. Just as one would expect after understanding what kind of person James is, he proceeded to attribute everything to me, stating that the reason I was so unhappy was that I didn't get to fulfill my aspiration, a dream that he extinguished, by the way, and that I was unfairly venting my frustrations on him and his mother. With my newfound resilience, I interjected, rejecting his pathetic attempts at manipulating me into believing that I was the issue. My mother-in-law eventually emerged from a nearby room, approaching me angrily, but I calmly informed her that if she hadn't made my life a living nightmare, as well as giving birth to the literal offspring of evil, she wouldn't have experienced what she went through. Karma is genuine. I would express remorse, but I am not. I do hope you discover tranquility with yourselves and cease being such furious and malicious individuals. But truthfully, I highly question anything will alter. 2 months later, I initiated the process of legal separation, and due to the extensive evidence demonstrating the psychological mistreatment I endured, I obtained sole custody of the children. I began dating once more and eventually encountered a genuinely compassionate man who treated me with utmost kindness and treated my children as if they were his own. It also didn't hurt that he was affluent. Furthermore, he wholeheartedly supported me and my unfulfilled aspirations. 2 years subsequently, I entered into matrimony with an exquisite gentleman in an even more magnificent and charming residence alongside my beautiful children and 3 canines. Additionally, I established a cafe named Chestnut, conveniently located on the same street as our abode. I genuinely couldn't be more content. The latest information I received regarding James is that he was arrested for driving under the influence, as well as several other minor charges related to disorderly behavior and inappropriate public conduct. Let's just say that individuals are reluctant to engage in business transactions with someone who possesses a tarnished reputation like that. Consequently, his enterprises began to crumble. As for my former mother-in-law, I'm certain she is actively avoiding consuming chili to the greatest extent possible.